The snow fell softly on the empty streets of downtown, each flake catching the warm glow of the Christmas lights that lined the old oak trees. It was Christmas Eve, and the city had settled into that peaceful quiet that comes when most families are gathered around their dinner tables. Sharing stories and laughter, Michael sat alone on the park bench, his expensive charcoal coat pulled tight against the winter chill. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air as he stared at the twinkling lights across the street. At 42, he was the youngest CEO his company had ever had. His corner office on the 35th floor was filled with awards and achievements, but tonight, none of that seemed to matter. The park around him was mostly empty, save for a few late shoppers hurrying past with their arms full of wrapped presents. Michael had nowhere to be. No family dinner waiting for him. No warm living room filled with the sound of children's laughter. Just the cold bench and the quiet company of his own thoughts. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the messages from his assistant. 3 dinner invitations from business partners. 2 holiday parties at upscale restaurants. All polite, professional gestures that would end with firm handshakes and talk of next quarter's profits. Michael put the phone away without responding. To any of them, the truth was he had built his entire life around his work. 18-hour days had become normal. Weekend meetings were routine. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten how to simply be still, how to enjoy the small moments that made life meaningful. Now, on Christmas Eve, that realization sat heavy in his chest. A small sound caught his attention. The soft crunch of snow under tiny boots. He looked up to see a little girl walking slowly toward him, her cheeks pink from the cold. She wore a burgundy coat that was clearly too big for her, with mittens that dangled from strings at her sleeves. A gray knitted hat with a pom-pom sat slightly crooked on her head, and golden curls peeked out from underneath. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, and she was carrying a small paper bag in her mittened hands. What struck Michael most was how she walked with such purpose, as if she had somewhere very important to be. The little girl stopped a few feet away from the bench and looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the gentle whisper of falling snow. "Are you sad?" she asked finally, her voice small but clear in the quiet evening air. Michael blinked, surprised by the directness of her question. Well, I suppose I might be a little sad," he admitted. Not sure why he was being so honest with a child he had never met. She tilted her head thoughtfully, the pom-pom on her hat bobbing with the movement. "My mommy says that nobody should be sad on Christmas Eve. She says Christmas is for being together with people you care about." "Your mommy sounds very wise," Michael said gently. "Where is she now?" The little girl pointed toward the small cafe across the street, where warm yellow light spilled out onto the snowy sidewalk. "She's getting our dinner. We're having Christmas Eve dinner at the cafe because our stove is broken. But Mommy says it's still going to be special because we're together." Michael looked toward the cafe and could see a young woman at the counter, talking to the cashier. Even from a distance, he could see the tired lines around her eyes, the way she counted bills carefully before making her order. She looked like someone who was working hard to make the best of a difficult situation. "That does sound special," Michael agreed, turning back to the little girl. "What's your name?" "Emma," she said, taking a small step closer to the bench. "What's yours?" "Michael." Emma studied his face for a moment, then looked down at the paper, bag in her hands. "Michael, do you want to have dinner with us?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and unexpected. Michael felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the heated buildings around them. That's very kind of you to ask, Emma, but I wouldn't want to intrude on your Christmas dinner with your mother." Emma shook her head earnestly. "It's not intruding. Mommy always says we should invite people who look lonely. She says sharing makes everything better, even when we don't have very much." Michael looked again toward the cafe, where Emma's mother was now waiting by the counter. He thought about his empty apartment, about the silence that would greet him when he finally decided to go home. Then he looked back at Emma, who was watching him with patient, hopeful eyes. "Are you sure your mother wouldn't mind?" he asked. Emma's face lit up with a smile. She won't mind at all. She likes meeting new people. And she makes really good hot chocolate. Before Michael could respond, Emma had taken his hand in her small, mittened one. Come on, she said, tugging gently. I'll introduce you. Michael found himself standing up, letting this tiny girl lead him across the snowy street toward the warm glow of the cafe. As they walked, Emma chattered happily about Christmas and snow and how she had asked Santa for a new book about dinosaurs. When they reached the cafe, Emma's mother looked up from the counter with surprise. She was younger than Michael had expected. Maybe in her late 20s, with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. Mommy, this is Michael, Emma announced proudly. He was sitting alone on the bench, and I asked him to have dinner with us. The woman's eyes widened slightly, and Michael saw her take in his expensive coat and polished shoes. For a moment, he worried she might be uncomfortable, might politely decline her daughter's invitation, but then she smiled, and it was warm and genuine. Hello, Michael. I'm Sarah. Emma has a habit of adopting stray people, but I hope you don't mind. We'd love to have you join us. I don't mind at all, Michael said, surprised by how much he meant it. If you're sure I'm not imposing, not at all, Sarah said. Emma's right. Christmas is better when it's shared. They found a small table by the window, and as they waited for their simple meal of sandwiches and soup, Michael found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. Emma told stories about her preschool class and asked him questions about his work, listening with the serious attention that only children can give. Sarah shared stories about her job at the local library and her evening classes to become a teacher. As the evening wore on, Michael realized something had changed. The weight he had been carrying in his chest had lifted, replaced by something lighter and warmer. He was laughing at Emma's jokes, helping her color on the paper placemats, and finding himself genuinely interested in Sarah's dreams for the future. When it was time to leave, Emma hugged him goodbye with the uninhibited affection of a child who had decided he was worth caring about. Sarah shook his hand and invited him to visit the library sometime, saying Emma would love to show him her favorite books. Walking back through the snowy streets, Michael felt different. Not because his problems had disappeared, but because he had been reminded of something important. Connection didn't require grand gestures or perfect circumstances. Sometimes it just required being open to the small acts of kindness that others offer, and being brave enough to offer them in return. The next morning, Michael would make some changes. He would start leaving the office earlier, would accept more invitations from colleagues, would remember that success meant more than the numbers on his quarterly reports. But tonight, as he walked home through the gently falling snow, he simply felt grateful for a little girl who had the courage to ask a simple question, and for a mother who had raised her to believe that kindness was always the right choice. Grateful for a Christmas Eve dinner that had reminded him what really mattered. The snow continued to fall, but Michael no longer felt cold.